job posting appeared on a seasonal employment website in late August. Winter caretaker needed for Camp Whispering Pines. Remote location. Free housing. November through April. Competitive salary. Must be comfortable with isolation and able to handle basic maintenance. Apply immediately. Jake Morrison had been searching for winter work that came with housing, tired of bouncing between seasonal jobs and cheap motels. The pay was decent, and 6 months of guaranteed housing would let him save money. He applied that same day and received a phone call within hours. The camp director was a woman named Margaret Holloway, who sounded tired and rushed. She explained that the position involved maintaining the property during the off-season, checking buildings for damage, clearing snow, preventing frozen pipes, and ensuring everything was ready for the next summer. Jake would live alone in the main lodge with access to supplies and equipment. The nearest town was 40 miles away over mountain roads that became treacherous in winter. Could he handle complete isolation for 6 months? Jake said he could. Margaret seemed relieved and told him to arrive on the 1st of November. She would meet him there to hand over the keys and explain the duties. Camp Whispering Pines sat in a valley deep in the mountains, surrounded by dense pine forest on all sides. Jake arrived on a gray November morning to find a collection of weathered buildings clustered around a central lodge. There were a dozen small cabins arranged in a semicircle, a mess hall, an activities building, a boathouse by a dark lake, and various storage sheds. Everything looked tired and neglected, paint peeling and wood weathering. Margaret was waiting in the lodge, a woman in her 60s with iron gray hair and eyes that looked like they had seen too much. She showed him around quickly, explaining the heating system, the generator, the water pumps. She pointed out which buildings needed weekly checks and which could be left alone until spring. Then she handed him a thick binder labeled caretaker manual and a smaller laminated card. "Read the manual tonight," she said. "It has all the maintenance schedules and emergency procedures. But this card is more important." She tapped the laminated sheet. "These are the rules. Follow them exactly. Never break them, not even once." Jake looked at the rules card and felt his stomach tighten. There were 18 rules listed in small, precise handwriting. Rule 1 stated that Jake must stay inside the main lodge between sunset and sunrise. All doors and windows must be locked during these hours. No exceptions. Rule 2 specified that if Jake heard children laughing or playing outside after dark, he was to ignore it completely. He was not to look out the windows or open the doors. The sounds were not real children. Rule 3 instructed that certain cabins were marked with red X symbols on their doors. Jake was never to enter these cabins under any circumstances, not even during daylight. If he saw the door to a marked cabin open, he was to close it from outside without looking in and report it in the logbook. Rule 4 stated that Jake must check all the unmarked cabins every Monday morning, walking through each one to verify they were empty and undamaged. He was to complete these checks before noon. Rule 5 was specific. If Jake found items that had not been there during the previous check, particularly children's toys or clothing, he was to leave them exactly where they were found and note their location in the logbook. He was never to move them or take them. Rule 6 warned that sometimes Jake would see lights in the cabins at night. He was not to investigate. The lights would go out on their own by morning. Rule 7 stated that the boathouse was off limits after the first snow. Jake was to padlock it before the snow came and not open it again until spring thaw. Rule 8 instructed that if Jake saw someone standing at the edge of the lake, he was to immediately return to the lodge and stay inside until the figure was gone. He was not to approach or call out to the person. Rule 9 specified that the camp bell in front of the lodge must never be rung. The rope had been removed, but if Jake ever felt compelled to ring it, he was to leave the camp immediately. Rule 10 was emphatic. If Jake woke in the middle of the night to find all the lights in the lodge off despite having left them on, he was to get a flashlight, go to his room, lock the door, and wait until sunrise. He was not to try to turn the lights back on or investigate. Rule 11 stated that footprints in the snow were normal and should be ignored. Even if they appeared to circle the buildings or approach the windows, Jake was not to follow them or try to determine who made them. Rule 12 warned that Jake might hear singing coming from the woods, particularly children's camp songs. He was to close all windows and play music or television loud enough to drown it out. He was not to listen to the words or try to identify the voices. Rule 13 instructed that if the phone in the lodge rang, Jake should answer, but must hang up immediately if he heard children's voices. He was not to listen to what they said or respond to them. Rule 14 stated that the fire pit in the center of camp must remain cold and unused all winter. If Jake ever found it burning, he was to go to the lodge, lock the doors, and call the emergency number in the manual. He was not to try to extinguish it himself. Rule 15 specified that Jake should never count the cabins. The number might be wrong, and noticing the discrepancy would draw unwanted attention. Rule 16 warned that sometimes Jake would see children playing in the camp during the day. If the children appeared normal and happy, he should go inside and wait for them to leave. If the children appeared wrong in any way, he should not look at them directly and should retreat to the lodge immediately. Rule 17 stated that the woods surrounding the camp were off limits. Jake was never to go into the forest beyond the cleared campgrounds, even during daylight. And Rule 18, printed in larger text at the bottom, simply read, "If you break any of these rules, pack your belongings and leave immediately. Do not wait until morning. Drive away and do not come back. Your final paycheck will be mailed. Margaret watched as Jake read through the list. "I know it seems extreme," she said quietly, "but this camp has a history. Things happened here a long time ago. The rules keep you safe. Every caretaker who has followed them has survived the winter. Everyone who broke them either left or disappeared." Jake asked what kind of history. Margaret shook her head. "That is not something you need to know. Just follow the rules and you will be fine." She handed him the keys and a phone number. "Call if you have real emergencies. Maintenance questions can wait until I visit in January." Then she left, driving away in a pickup truck, leaving Jake alone in the silent camp. He spent the rest of that day exploring during the daylight, familiarizing himself with the layout. The camp was larger than it had seemed at first, with buildings scattered through the cleared area. He found the cabins with red X marks painted on their doors. 3 of them clustered together on the east side of camp. The paint looked fresh despite the buildings being weathered. Jake felt an uncomfortable urge to peek inside, but remembered the rule and stayed away. The unmarked cabins were standard summer camp fare: bunk beds and dusty shelves, and old decorations still hanging on the walls. They felt sad and abandoned, frozen in time from when children had last occupied them. Jake did his first Monday check, even though it was Wednesday, walking through each one and finding them empty. In one cabin, he noticed a stuffed rabbit on a bottom bunk that looked too clean to have been there since summer. He noted it in the logbook as instructed. As the sun began to set on his first evening, Jake secured the lodge according to the rules. He checked every window, lock, and door, making sure everything was sealed. He turned on lights throughout the building, not just in the rooms he was using. Then he made dinner and tried to relax, but as darkness fell completely, he heard it. Laughter. Children's laughter, distant but clear, coming from somewhere outside. It sounded like kids playing, running, and shouting in the darkness. Jake's first instinct was to look out the window, to see what was out there. But he remembered Rule 2. He turned on the television loud and tried to ignore the sounds. The laughter continued for over an hour before finally fading away. Jake slept poorly that first night, waking at every small sound. But morning came without incident, and he ventured outside to find fresh snow had fallen during the night. And in that snow were footprints, small footprints, like children's shoes, crisscrossing the camp. They circled the lodge multiple times, approached the windows, led between the cabins. Jake followed the rule and ignored them, focusing instead on his maintenance tasks. The snow would cover them soon enough. The pattern repeated over the following weeks. Peaceful days spent maintaining the property, checking systems, clearing snow. Then darkness would fall, and the strangeness would begin. Laughter and singing from outside. Lights appearing in cabin windows that Jake had not turned on. Footprints in the snow that appeared overnight despite no one being there. Jake followed the rules meticulously, and nothing harmed him. But the isolation was harder than he had expected. He was completely alone, 40 miles from the nearest town, over increasingly difficult mountain roads. His only company was the strange phenomena that occurred every night. In his third week, Jake saw the figure by the lake. He was carrying firewood to the lodge in the late afternoon when he noticed someone standing at the water's edge. A woman in a long dress, facing the dark water, completely still. Jake stopped, his arms full of wood, and stared. The woman did not move, did not acknowledge him. Something about her stillness was deeply wrong. Jake remembered Rule 8. He dropped the firewood and hurried back to the lodge, locking the door behind him. When he looked out the window minutes later, the woman was gone. The first snow came in early December, and Jake padlocked the boathouse as instructed. He noticed while doing so that the building had no windows, and the door was unusually heavy, reinforced with metal. What was inside that needed to be sealed away all winter? But he did not investigate, just secured the padlock and walked away. He did his Monday cabin checks and found more items that had not been there before. A toy truck in one cabin, a small jacket hung on a hook in another, a child's drawing on a table, the paper fresh, and the crayon colors bright. Jake documented each finding in the logbook and left everything in place. The items disturbed him because they suggested someone was accessing the cabins despite no tracks ever leading to or from them. It was as if the objects simply appeared. The singing started in mid-December. Jake would hear it at night, children's voices singing camp songs he half recognized. The melody would drift from the woods, dozens of young voices in harmony. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time, pulling at something deep inside him that wanted to go outside and find the source. Jake would close all the windows and blast music until the singing was drowned out, forcing himself not to listen to the words. The phone rang one evening just after dark. Jake answered. "Hello, this is Jake at Camp Whispering Pines." Children's voices erupted from the receiver, multiple kids talking over each other, excited and wrong. The words did not make sense, syllables that formed no language. Jake hung up immediately as instructed. The phone rang again. He let it ring until it stopped. It rang a third time. Jake unplugged it from the wall and sat in silence, his heart racing. Christmas came, and Jake spent it alone in the lodge, trying not to think about the strange occurrences outside. He had been there almost 2 months now, and the isolation was wearing on him. He had no one to talk to, no way to verify that what he was experiencing was real. The rules kept him safe, but they also confirmed that the strangeness was acknowledged, expected, part of the job. What had happened at this camp? He tried researching the camp's history using his laptop, but the internet connection was spotty, and he found little information. Camp Whispering Pines had operated since the 1950s, hosting summer camps for children. There were old photos showing smiling kids, normal camp activities, nothing unusual. But then he found a newspaper article from 20 years ago. A brief mention of the camp being temporarily closed following an unspecified incident. No details, no explanation. The camp had reopened the following year with new management. Jake wondered if that incident was connected to the rules. In early January, Margaret visited as promised. She arrived in a 4-wheel drive truck, bringing supplies and Jake's paycheck. She asked how he was managing, and Jake told her honestly, "The nights are difficult. The phenomena are constant. But I have been following the rules." Margaret nodded approvingly. "Good. You are doing better than most. Some caretakers break within the first month. The isolation gets to them, or they decide the rules are nonsense. Those people do not last." Jake asked what happened to them. Margaret's expression darkened. "Some leave safely if they leave right away. Others stay too long after breaking rules and they disappear. We find the lodge empty and no trace of where they went. That is why the rules are absolute." She checked his logbook and examined the items he had documented finding in the cabins. "This is normal," she said. "They leave things, reminders. You are doing the right thing by not touching them." Jake asked who they were. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "Children who never left camp," she said finally. "A long time ago, something went wrong. The details do not matter now. What matters is that their presence lingers and the rules keep you separate from them. As long as you maintain the boundary, they cannot harm you." She left that afternoon, promising to return in March. Jake watched her truck disappear down the mountain road and felt more alone than ever. The winter deepened, and with it, the phenomena intensified. Jake began seeing the children during the day, as well as hearing them at night. They would appear at the edge of the clearing, playing in the snow, laughing and running. They looked normal from a distance, just kids enjoying winter. But if Jake watched them too long, he would notice wrongness. The way they moved was slightly off, their games following no logical pattern, their laughter echoing too long. He would retreat inside as instructed, and the children would eventually vanish. One morning during his Monday check, Jake found a cabin that had been rearranged. The bunk beds had been moved, the furniture repositioned, as if someone had been redecorating. But there were no footprints in the snow leading to the cabin, and the door had been locked. Jake documented it and left everything as he found it. The next week, the cabin was different again. The beds were back in their original positions, but new drawings covered the walls, children's artwork depicting the camp. The drawings were dated from 20 years ago. Jake began having nightmares. In the dreams, he was walking through the camp at night despite the rules. Children called to him from the cabins, begging him to play, to stay. He would see into the marked cabins with the red X marks, and the interiors were wrong. Spaces that should not exist, darkness that moved. He would wake in a panic, checking that his door was locked, waiting for sunrise. In February, the compulsion came. Jake woke one night to find all the lights in the lodge off despite having left them on. Following Rule 10, he got his flashlight and retreated to his room, locking the door. But as he sat on his bed in the darkness, he felt an overwhelming urge to leave the room, to go outside, to walk into the woods and keep walking. The compulsion was physical, pulling at him like hands dragging him toward the door. Jake gripped the bed frame and forced himself to stay still. He recited the rules out loud, over and over, using them as an anchor. The urge gradually faded as dawn approached. When the sun rose and he emerged from his room, the lights in the lodge were back on. That incident shook Jake badly. The compulsion had been so strong, so certain that he needed to walk into the forest. What would have happened if he had given in? Would he have become another disappearance, another caretaker who violated the rules and vanished? He realized that the rules were not just guidelines, but active protections against something that wanted to consume him. Jake made it to March, 4 months into his contract. Margaret visited again and seemed impressed that he was still there and following the protocols. "You have 2 months left," she said. "The hardest part is behind you. The phenomena will begin to fade as spring approaches. They are stronger in the dead of winter when the camp is most isolated." Jake asked why she kept the camp open if it was so dangerous. Margaret sighed, because during the summer, when children are here and the camp is full of life and noise and activity, nothing strange happens. It is only in the off-season, in the silence and emptiness, that they manifest. We cannot close permanently because the camp itself needs to be used, needs to fulfill its purpose. Otherwise, the boundary weakens further. She checked the logbook and noticed Jake's notes about the compulsion. "That means they have noticed you specifically," she said. "You have become real to them. The next 2 months will be difficult. They will try harder to pull you across. You must remain vigilant. Do not give in to any urges or desires that feel unnatural. Trust the rules completely." She left him with extra supplies and a satellite phone for emergencies. "If you need to leave, call me first. I can have someone here within hours. But try to finish the contract. We need caretakers who can last the full season." March brought warmer weather, and Jake hoped the phenomena would decrease, as Margaret had suggested, but instead they seemed to intensify in different ways. The children appeared more often during the day, and they came closer to the lodge. They would stand just beyond the windows, watching him. Their faces were clearer now, and Jake could see that while they looked like normal children, their expressions never changed. They smiled constantly, frozen smiles that never reached their eyes. When he retreated from the windows, they would remain outside for hours before finally dispersing. The singing changed too. Instead of distant camp songs, it became more targeted. Jake would hear his name in the melody. "Jake, come play. Jake, join us. Jake, stay forever." The words would worm into his mind, making him think about joining them, about how lonely he was, about how the children just wanted a friend. He would blast music to drown it out, but the words lingered in his thoughts. One night, Jake broke a rule by accident. He was exhausted and stressed, and he forgot to lock one of the ground floor windows before dark. He realized his mistake around midnight when he did a security check. The window was open. Following the rules meant all windows should be locked. He had violated Rule 1. Jake's hands shook as he closed and locked the window. Should he leave immediately, as Rule 18 instructed? Or was it a minor enough violation that he could stay? He spent the night in terror, expecting something to happen. But dawn came without incident. Jake realized that the rules had some flexibility for honest mistakes, as long as he corrected them quickly. But the experience reinforced how careful he needed to be. One major violation could be fatal. In early April, Jake experienced the fire pit incident. He looked out a window one afternoon and saw smoke rising from the central fire pit. Orange flames were burning despite the pit having been cold all winter. Jake immediately went to the phone and called the emergency number. Margaret answered. "The pit is burning," Jake said. She was quiet for a moment. "Stay in the lodge. Lock everything. Do not go near the fire. I am sending someone." She hung up. Jake secured the lodge and watched the fire from the window. It burned for 6 hours before 3 trucks arrived from town. Men in heavy coats approached the pit and did something Jake could not see clearly. The fire went out. The men left without coming to the lodge. Later, Margaret called to confirm he was safe. "That only happens rarely," she said. "You did the right thing. 2 more weeks and your contract is done." Those final 2 weeks were the longest of Jake's life. He was so close to finishing, to surviving the full winter season. But the phenomena seemed determined to prevent it. The children appeared constantly, surrounding the lodge day and night. The singing never stopped. The lights went out repeatedly. Jake found items in the lodge itself now, toys appearing in rooms he had just cleaned. The boundary was weakening, or they were trying harder. He stopped sleeping, afraid of what might happen if he let his guard down. He survived on coffee and adrenaline, counting the days until May 1st, when his contract ended. He followed every rule with obsessive precision, double-checking locks, avoiding the marked cabins, ignoring the children, staying inside after dark. His sanity felt paper thin, but he refused to break. On the morning of April 30th, Jake packed his belongings and waited. Margaret had promised to arrive at dawn on May 1st to release him from the contract. He spent the final night sitting in the main room of the lodge with all the lights on, watching the darkness outside. Children pressed against the windows, dozens of them, their frozen smiles visible in the light from inside. They seemed to know he was leaving, that they were running out of time to claim him. Dawn came slowly, the darkness reluctant to fade, but as the sun rose, the children vanished like mist. Jake watched them disappear one by one until the camp was empty again. Margaret arrived an hour later, looking relieved to find him intact. "You made it," she said. "The full 6 months. You are only the third caretaker to complete an entire contract in the past 20 years. Jake asked what happened to the others who finished. Margaret smiled sadly. "One works at another remote camp. One retired and never speaks of this place. You get to choose. Do you want to leave and never come back? Or do you want to return next winter?" Jake should have said he would never return, but 6 months of isolation and strangeness had changed him. He understood the camp now, understood the rules and the boundaries, and the children who never left. In a twisted way, he had become part of the place, and the money was good, better than anything else he could find. "I will think about it," he said. Margaret nodded as if she had expected that answer. "The camp gets into you. You will probably be back." She handed him his final paycheck and a letter of reference. Then she began preparing the camp for summer, opening buildings, and removing the red X marks from certain cabins. The camp would fill with living children soon, and the dead ones would retreat until the next winter. Jake drove away from Camp Whispering Pines, feeling empty and strange. The outside world seemed too bright, too loud, too real after 6 months in that isolated valley. He returned to his regular life, but found himself unable to settle. Normal jobs felt meaningless. Normal places felt boring. He kept thinking about the camp, about the rules, about the children who waited in the off-season. He lasted 3 months before calling Margaret and accepting the winter caretaker position for the next year. She seemed unsurprised. "Welcome back," she said. "You understand now. What we do is important. Someone has to maintain the boundary, has to ensure the rules are followed, and it takes a certain kind of person to handle it. You are that kind of person." Jake returned to the camp in November, moving back into the lodge with the familiar rules card and the logbook. The children were waiting. He could feel their presence as darkness fell on his first night back. Laughter echoed from outside. Footprints appeared in the first snow. Lights glowed in empty cabins. But Jake knew what to do now. He followed the rules, maintained the boundaries, survived the nights. He had become a keeper of the camp, one of the few people who could endure the off-season and maintain the fragile separation between the living world and whatever existed in that valley. It was a strange calling, but it was his now. He would spend winters in isolation, guarding a camp that held more than memories, following rules that kept ancient wrongness at bay. And each spring he would emerge, changed a little more, carrying knowledge that most people would never understand. Years passed. Jake became the longest-serving winter caretaker in the camp's history. He learned nuances to the rules, understanding when small deviations were acceptable and when absolute adherence was required. He developed his own rituals and coping mechanisms for the isolation, he made peace with the children, understanding that they were trapped between states, neither fully gone nor fully present, and the rules protected both them and him from crossing boundaries that should not be crossed. Margaret eventually retired, and Jake took over as the primary contact for the camp's winter operations. He began training new caretakers during their first seasons, teaching them not just the rules, but the mindset required to survive. Most still failed, unable to handle the psychological weight of the isolation and strangeness. But occasionally, someone would last, would prove capable of maintaining the boundary, and Jake would recognize in them the same adaptability he had developed, the capacity to exist in the spaces between normal and impossible. He never married, never settled in one place during the summer months. His life revolved around the camp and its cycles. Winter caretaker, summer trainer, eternal guardian of a place where children who died decades ago in an incident no one fully remembered still played and sang and waited for someone to join them. Jake kept them at bay with rules and locks and unwavering vigilance. It was lonely work. It was strange work. It required sacrifice and change and acceptance of truths most people never faced. But someone had to do it. Someone had to stand between the living children who came each summer and the dead ones who never left. Someone had to maintain the rules, guard the boundaries, survive the off-season, and Jake Morrison had become that someone, bound to Camp Whispering Pines by choice and necessity, walking the line between worlds every winter, following 18 rules that kept chaos contained. He was the caretaker, the guardian, the keeper of boundaries. And as long as he followed the rules, as long as he maintained the protocols written on that laminated card, both sides remained safe. The living could visit in summer without knowing what waited in the off-season, and the dead could exist without consuming the living. It was balance, fragile and strange, and Jake held it together, winter after winter, rule after rule, surviving in the isolated valley where Camp Whispering Pines stood frozen between June and November, between memory and present, between what was and what refused to end.